Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Kingdom Come. Now, Kingdom Come is a 4-issue comic book series written by Mark Waid and Alex Ross and illustrated by Alex Ross. Now, this was published by DC Comics in 1996. This is obviously a collected edition collecting all 4 issues into one graphic novel or trade paperback. Now, this was originally published under DC's Elseworlds imprint, which are stories that are specifically set outside of continuity, and this features some of DC's most popular characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Spectre, and many others. Now, from what I understand, this series was done as sort of DC's answer to a series that Marvel did 2 years prior called Marvels, which was also illustrated by Alex Ross. Now, from what I understand about Marvels, I haven't read it yet, but apparently it's set over the course of several years and details different events that have happened in the Marvel universe, but apparently it's all told from the point of view of a regular average guy. Like, the whole point of that comic was to show the Marvel universe from a more grounded, human perspective. And that's essentially what Mark Waid and Alex Ross try to do with this comic. Now, the plot of Kingdom Come is it's set in an alternate version of the DC universe, and basically in the comics universe, Superman for the past decade has been in sort of a self-imposed exile ever since an anti-hero named Magog, I'm not really sure how to say his name, but ever since this anti-hero was acquitted for murdering the Joker. Now, this was after the Joker committed a violent killing spree that actually resulted in the death of Lois Lane. So Superman has every reason to hate the Joker and want to see the Joker murdered, but he still very much believes that all human life is precious, even the life of a psychopath like the Joker, so he's disgusted when Magog is acquitted for the Joker's murder. And you find out that in Superman's absence, the world has become overrun by metahumans, but it's hard to tell anymore who is a superhero and who is a supervillain. There really is no lines anymore, and really all these fights that you see between the metahumans are basically just superhuman gang wars. Like, there's no longer a Justice League or even a Legion of Doom, you just have these superhuman gangs constantly fighting with each other, and usually with complete disregard for the lives of normal humans. Now, the story is primarily told from the point of view of an elderly pastor named Norman Mckay, who starts having visions of the end of the world, of the biblical Armageddon, and it appears that this Armageddon might be brought about because of the metahumans. And he ends up getting visited by the Spectre. The Spectre was a cop who was granted supernatural powers by the Presence, and ultimately became an avatar for the Presence. Now, the Presence in the DC universe is basically the being or force that created the universe, essentially what we would call God. And the Spectre ends up taking Norman on this journey where they both end up as invisible observers to these events that could be leading to an apocalyptic war between the metahumans. A war that could involve Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, and Billy Batson, who appears to have joined forces with Lex Luthor. What I find interesting about Kingdom Come is how it deconstructs the superhero genre sort of through the lens of mythology and religion. It draws a correlation between the superheroes of modern comics and the gods of ancient myths and legends. I've heard people call superhero stories the modern equivalent of the Greek myths. Now, in some ways I do think that's sort of hyperbole, but you can honestly call characters like Odysseus, Achilles, Hercules, or even, granted this is Sumerian mythology, but a character like Gilgamesh, you could call these the original superheroes. And much like Alan Moore's Watchmen, it puts the superhero genre sort of in a realistic context where, let's be real, if superheroes did exist, they would be gods to us. And this does that through the eyes of religion, where the whole story is told from the point of view of a Christian pastor. And essentially, the comic is a modern retelling of the Book of Revelation from the Bible, but with superheroes. And in the story, Superman ends up representing a Christ-like figure, and there's this whole idea that superheroes are almost like the amalgamation between man and God. But without giving too much away, Superman is not the only messianic figure in the story. Now, I'm not trying to make the comic sound like it's some kind of Christian superhero story, but it does borrow a lot from Christian mythology. But above all of that, Kingdom Come is also a critique and a satire on the state of the comic book industry at the time. The 1990s was really the era of the anti-hero and the dark and edgy superhero comics, i.e. the stuff that Image was putting out at the time. And apparently the character of Mckay was a direct parody of everything that Alex Ross and Mark Waid hated about comic books at the time. And even outside of Image Comics, you had Marvel producing characters like Deadpool, and even with DC Comics, a lot of comic book storylines were becoming a lot darker, like the Death of Superman story arc, or the Nightfall story arc for Batman. Granted, I do think that's actually a really good comic, but I see why people who maybe grew up with more of the Silver Age of superhero comics might be a little taken aback by how dark and gritty superhero comics were becoming at the time. And I like how in the story, both Superman and the character of Norman Mckay are almost like dual protagonists, and they're both questioning, is the world becoming a darker place? And the character of Superman is wondering, is there really room in this world now for me? Is there room in this darker world for Superman? And I like how in the comic you have these new meta-humans where you can't really tell who is a hero and who is a villain, where there's sort of this shade of gray about them. At the same time, there is sort of a shade of gray about the characters that we know. For example, in the comics universe, crime in Gotham City is at an all-time low, but that's only because Batman has virtually turned Gotham City into a police state. And Superman calls him out on this. At the same time, there are some things that the new Justice League that you see form in the story when Superman returns, there are some things that they do that could also be considered kind of draconian. Especially some of Wonder Woman's actions, and there are even points where Wonder Woman calls Superman out for being too soft. And towards the very end of this comic, something happens that almost causes Superman to do something very evil. And again, very much like Alan Moore's Watchmen, the book is simultaneously a critique and a love letter to the superhero genre. And I gotta say, the character of Norman Mckay is a really interesting character, and I love the idea of having a superhero comic primarily told from the point of view of a regular average guy. And I also like how Alex Ross drew Norman to look like his father. I thought that was a really nice, tribute to his father. And Alex Ross's artwork in this is very well done. It's hyper-realistic, but also kind of stylized at the same time. Now, I don't think this was meant as a jab at other artists of comic books at the time, but I will say, Alex Ross's artwork in this comic is better than 90% of most artwork you saw in comics at the time. So yeah, I recommend Kingdom Come highly. I don't think it's quite as good as the aforementioned Watchmen, or even something like Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, but it's still a very good comic, and I do recommend it. So yeah, that was my review on Kingdom Come by Mark Waid and Alex Ross, and this concludes this year's series of Superman reviews. Yeah, I know I had a relatively short list of Superman comics to review this year, but up next will be my series of Batman reviews for this year, so stay tuned for that, and bye.